Hello and welcome to the OASIS Advanced Tracer Admin course. This course is geared towards OASIS Tracer system administrators and will focus on the programming of two of the more advanced features of the OASIS Tracer system software. More specifically, the topics covered in this course will be employee evaluations and ad campaigns. The first topic that we'll cover are employee evaluations. Employee evaluations are quite literally scorecards that can be created in the OASIS system software so that you can go in and grade your employees' performance. Inherently, this is a fantastic tool for system supervisors and managers where you can go in and literally grade the performance of your employees. These are also, though, a really great tool that you can put in front of your employees so that they can go in and grade their own performance, giving you some perspective of where they think they stand in the grand scheme of things. Programming employee evaluations is an administrative function, so we're going to have to go in, customize, program, and give permissions to these evaluations so that your employees can use them appropriately. There are a few steps to setting up employee evaluations, so the topics that we'll be discussing within this section are first and foremost the creation of lists and call filters. Lists and call filters are groupings that we create in the software so that the employee evaluations can be geared towards the appropriate individuals under the correct circumstances. Once we create those lists and call filters, the next thing we're going to take a look at is creating evaluation scales. New to version 7 and beyond, there's a lot of customization that can be done in terms of how you want to be able to grade the questions that we'll program in the employee evaluations. Last but not least, we'll go about the actual programming of the scorecard itself, setting it up and customizing it for your various departments and employees within the organization. Once we take a nice look at those employee evaluations, the second topic that we're going to discuss in this Advanced Tracer Admin course is the programming of ad campaigns. Ad campaigns are tracking mechanisms that we can set up to keep track of your various marketing efforts. So if you do a lot of advertising, newspaper, magazine, side of the bus, infomercials, sticking flyers under people's windshield wipers, whatever that might look like for your company, we can set up tracking mechanisms to tell you how successful those campaigns have been, comparing one campaign to the other so you know in the future which one gave you the most bang for your buck. Even for companies that might not be too dollars and cents oriented or who do a lot of marketing efforts, ad campaign tracking is a really neat feature that you can use to keep track of your various DNIS numbers and see things about the public that's calling in. So while we set up ad campaigns, I'll also shed light on a few other ways where you can spin this feature to use it to your company's advantage. Within the topic of ad campaigns, we're first and foremost going to take a look at how to program those ad campaigns, and then secondly, to clean up the class, we're going to take a look at a couple styles of reports that these ad campaigns can generate, just to give you a nice tip of the iceberg idea of how these can benefit your organizations. Those then are the topics that we'll be discussing in this Advanced Tracer Administrative course. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump back into the OASIS Management Studio software where we can go about the administrative programming to get these working as necessary. As I've done in the previous administrative courses, I'm going to log in today with the sysadmin profile. If you have a profile that has full administrative access, by all means use the username and password that you've created for yourself or that's been granted to you by your administrator. In my case, I'm going to log in as the sysadmin, the one profile that's there for you out of the cardboard. Username SYSADMIN, password is also the same, SYSADMIN. Go ahead and log into the software. That's going to take us right back to the administrative side where we can do our programming for today. Now for the topics of today, we're not going to need to do any programming inside of the server folder, so I'm just going to go ahead and collapse that server folder to give a real better view of what's going on here with our programming for this session. The first area I do want us to get into though today is the Lists and Other Resources area. Specifically, I'm going to open up the Lists area. I'm going to click on one of these list flavors here to get some white space to the right of the screen. Now, as we've done in the previous administrative classes, programming lists and call filters is very important for definition purposes. For the sake of employee evaluations, we need to use these different flavors of discriminator so that you can program these evaluations to really apply to the appropriate people under the correct circumstances. One of the great things about our employee evaluations is that they are very customizable. So you can make one umbrella scorecard that applies to all people inside of your organization under all circumstances. But you can also create very departmentalized scorecards. So you can set up a sales scorecard and ask very sales-oriented questions of your sales team, but also set up a customer service scorecard and ask very customer service-oriented questions of your customer service team. If you want to, you can even get so granular that you can set up scorecards for each individual inside of the company. Ask questions of Billy that you need Billy to be working on, and ask questions of Susie that Susie needs to be working on. So we can set up as many of these scorecards as you want and ask any questions of those individuals that you would like to ask. However, in order to set up those different departmentalized or individual scorecards, we first have to go into the software and define those groupings. Because inherently, our system doesn't know who's in your sales team or your customer service team. So we need to program that via these lists and call filters to give that definition. So for today's example, let's say we want to set up a sales-oriented scorecard for the sales team to ask sales questions of their recordings. To do so, the first thing that we'll want to do is define the sales team. We can use any of these sorts of discriminators that we'd like, but the most common one that will be used is the extension list type. I'm going to pick on those extensions that make up my sales floor. So having highlighted the discriminator flavor of interest, I come to the right-hand side, click on the plus icon at the top. That's going to prompt me to enter a value, and I'm going to go ahead and call this the sales team. Click the checkbox below to make a call filter for this list, and go ahead and hit save. Having done so, I've now created a very generic sales team. So I can come inside the extension area, expand that flavor out, and I'll see that generic group here called the sales team. If I go ahead and give that group a click, I'll populate two columns over to the right where I can now give this shell of a team some definition. The far right-hand column are all of the extensions inside of my organization, so I'm going to page to some actual humans, highlight a few extensions that make up my sales floor, and I'm going to kick those individuals over to the left. They are now members of this sales team. So when I create a sales scorecard here in just a moment, that scorecard is going to be applicable to all 5 of these individuals. Any call that goes to Eric, Doug, Julie, Elwood, or Chuck's extensions are going to apply to the sales evaluation. That scorecard will not apply to Justin, Sue, or anybody else that has not been defined as being part of the team. So before you create your scorecards, you need to think about who these scorecards are going to apply to, and then create those respective groups inside of your lists and other resources area. For our sakes in this example, that's the one grouping that I need to create, but you can certainly create as many additional groups as you would need for any additional amount of scorecards that you're going to be setting up in your software. Having defined now my sales team inside that list and other resources area, we can go about starting to create the scorecard itself. In order to start that process, we're going to come here to the appropriately named Evaluations folder. We can expand out Evaluations, and the first thing that we're going to need to do to start customizing this scorecard is define an evaluation scale. The ability to define evaluation scales is new to OASIS version 7 and beyond, but this gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of how I want to be able to grade the questions that I'm going to set forth in the evaluation. Now, if I click on Evaluation Scale, and in fact expand this folder out, you'll see that out of the box there's one scale already pre-created for your organization to take advantage of. That's a 0 to 5 scale. The 0 to 5 scale includes a few different flavors of ways that you can pick and choose how to grade your calls. This can either be a sliding number, so how friendly were you on a scale of 1 to 5? It can be a simple pass-fail question, were you or weren't you? And it can also be a simple yes-no question, were you nice, were you not nice? So those are the 3 flavors of answers that you can choose to evaluate your questions without having to set up an evaluation scale custom for your organization. If you'd like to take advantage of that scale, you can go ahead and move on to the second step, which is the actual programming of the scorecard. If you want to give yourself a little more flexibility though, and customize an answer choice that's specific to your evaluation type, we can come into the software and now define new evaluation scales. Here's how we do that. With evaluation scale highlighted, you come to the right and you click the little plus icon. And now we can create a new scale that we can use to grade the questions in the evaluation. In order to set up the scale, we just work our way from top to bottom and customize those answer choices. So for this particular one, we might call this one the sales eval. This is going to be the name of our scale. This is the scale we'll use for that sales scorecard. The scale range is probably the most important determination that you'll make here. We can give our scales any value from 0 to 10. If I want it to be a 0-point scale, I certainly can. If I want it to be a 10-point scale, I can do that as well, and anything in between. So for this particular scale, let's take advantage of all the options. I'm going to make this a 0 to 10 scale. So all of my questions and my final score are going to be a function of some number out of 10. Having chosen the sliding scale values, the amount of options that I want for my questions, I go about now creating the specific answers for the scorecard questions that I'm going to need. To do that, you first click the New button, having determined that scale range. That'll pop up a box where you can now set the specific answers for your questions. We might want one of them just to be a simple 0 to 10 sliding scale. So let's maybe call this one 0 to 10, where we're going to show just the numerical values, maybe asking some sort of a sliding scale question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how nice were you on this call? And we're going to give that person every single option, and all we're going to represent are those numerical values. Setting up a 0 to 10 sliding scale, just that easy. I can go ahead and hit save. I've now got a 0 to 10 scale that I can use to grade my questions. To show some of the more customization though, let's create another one, and let's maybe make this one our good to bad scale. Good to bad. And for this one, we only need a few choices. For 0, we're going to call this bad. 5 is going to be okay. And 10 is going to be good. We only really want to be able to grade these particular questions with one of those 3 options. So we can give them those text values, and then we can turn off any other option. So it's still going to be on a sliding scale of 0 to 10, but all my choices are going to be 0, 5, and 10. They were either bad, okay, or good. So when I go to grade a question with that good to bad scale, my drop-down options are only going to be 4-fold. Not applicable, bad, okay, or good. And it's going to give me the values that are appropriate for those choices. I go ahead and hit save. I've now got that scale set up for a good to bad scale. If I wanted to do a simple yes, no, or a pass, fail, I could also do that. Go ahead and hit new, pull this scale over to the right so we can see a little better what's going on. We'll make this one fail, and we'll make 10 pass. So for these questions, you either get the full 10-point value or you get 0 value. And once again, I can turn off all the other options in between so that when I go to grade these questions, I'm only going to be presented with 2 options. First thing I need to do is give this scale a name here, so we'll call this our fail pass. Hit save. I've got that choice now presented as well. So within this one sales evaluation, I'm going to have 3 different ways that I can grade my questions. And for any given question, I'm going to choose the applicable type, and I can go ahead and grade those questions with those scale types. You can create as many of these as you want. You can customize them however you would like. Add as much text in there as you would want. Know that we're going to have those on a sliding scale from that 0 to 10. Once we submit the scorecard, it's then going to compute the data, and it's going to give me some overall weighted average. So if I got a bunch of fails, a couple bads, and a few ones, I'm going to have a much lower score than if I got a bunch of 10s, a bunch of goods, and several passes. All of that's going to compute, though, as a numerical averaged value once I submit the scorecard. So I'm happy with the scorecard that we created. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and now that sales evaluation is going to be waiting in the wings for me when it comes time for me to set up my evaluation. As with our scorecards, you can set up as many of these scales as you would want. They are completely customizable, so program those for your different evaluation types and have the different answer choices available to you when you need to set them up for those questions. Now that our scale has been defined for the sales evaluation, the last major phase of the game is actually setting up the scorecard itself. To do that, we're going to come to the area called Evaluation Definitions, and here's where we can set up our scorecards. Now you'll notice in the right-hand window, there are no scorecards created out of the box inside of your system. We don't know what you want to ask of your employees or how you want to ask it, so we let you go ahead and customize these scorecards specific to your industry. In order to start creating the first scorecard, with evaluation definition highlighted, you go to the right-hand side, click the plus icon, and it'll pop a template for you. This template is the one thing we're going to have to fill out in order to create a scorecard inside of your software. So we'll just go ahead and fill out the values from top to bottom, left to right, and we'll go through the customization of a sales scorecard here for this organization. Description, pretty straightforward. Let's call this our sales eval. Once we give it a bit of a title so we know what we're looking at when it comes time for grading, all the other choices that we have here in this top section are the logistics. Who it's going to apply to, under what circumstances, and what do I want it to look and feel like. So the first major decision that we have below is the grader. As I mentioned in the introduction, these scorecards are really great for two audiences. Inherently, they're great for managers and supervisors, so I can go in and I can pick on those employees that I manage. They're also really great though for reflective purposes, so I can put these scorecards in front of my employees and they can grade their own performance on their calls, giving me some perspective as to how well they think they're doing every time they're on the phone. I can also choose to keep this top radio button chosen, and I'm going to make this for both self and supervisor graders. Sometimes employees might use it to grade themselves, sometimes supervisors might use it to pick on those people they manage. I'm going to keep it nice and flexible, and you'll see why as we cruise down to the bottom of the form here and start actually setting up some of those questions. So having determined the general audience, the field to the right is now going to ask me specifically who do I want this scorecard to apply to. This is where our lists come into play that we looked at just a few steps ago. Here's where I can specifically start telling the system who to apply this scorecard to. And the ways that you can pin an evaluation to an individual are based on one of two things. It's either going to be based on the extension that they sit at or the agent ID that they use to log into their ACD groups. Either variety is going to work just fine, but those are the two list types that you would use to pin this scorecard to a specific individual. Now, when we set up our call filter, we chose the extension variety. So I'm going to click on extensions, click the drop-down menu, and we will see that sales team that we created just earlier. Those are the 5 individuals that I picked on to be part of my sales team. Go ahead and click that choice. Now I've told the system this sales evaluation is going to apply to those 5 sales team representatives. Once I choose who the scorecard is going to apply to, the next choice to the right is the type of scale that I want to use. These are the scales that we previously constructed. If I click the drop down, there's our little sales eval scales. Those are the different choices of ways that we want to grade these questions. That's the one I'm going to use for this scorecard, having customized it. Go ahead and click that scale type. That's going to be the types of answers that we're going to use for our questions. Last but not least on this line, it's the scoring style. This is how you want to be able to interact with those answers. There's 2 choices. We can either choose to have those represented as radio buttons, so when I go to grade a particular question, I'll see all the different options, much in this format where I have radio button choices. Or I can choose a drop-down list, where I click on a drop-down and it'll give me all the different values for those answer types, and I click the appropriate one from the drop-down menu. This is just what it's going to look like for the employee who actually goes about the grading process. It's totally a personal preference, and it doesn't matter which you choose. In this case, let's go ahead and make this one a radio button. Last but not least, we get the call filters area. Within the call filter section, we're going to determine under which circumstances we want this scorecard to apply to those people that are inside of our sales team. Lots of flexibility here with the call filters area, so let me show you a few examples that are commonly used. In fact, the most common one is that people will grab that matching list type, kick it over to the left, and essentially what they've just said is this sales evaluation is going to apply to the sales team's extensions on all of their sales calls. So every single call that goes to or from their extension, this scorecard is going to lend itself to. That might very well be the way you want to keep it. Use the matching call filter for the list. We're just going to have this available on every single one of their recordings. But to show some of the flexibility, you can certainly create other types of call filters, and you can mix and match. Here's a good one, outbound calls. Let's kick that over to the left. Now what I've said is this sales evaluation applies to the sales team calls on only their outbound calls. I might want to make a different scorecard for their inbound calls, because depending on the direction of the recording, I'm going to have different expectations. Outbound, I want them getting their foot in the door. I want them making connections, generating leads. Inbound, I want them answering questions, providing quotes, giving discounts, doing what they need to do to make the sale. So depending on the direction of the recording, I'm going to have different expectations. I'm going to ask different things of them. Or another one here that's going to come in handy for us, I could do VIP customer. Kick that one over to the left, And based on the caller ID, I'm going to choose what to ask of my employees. If the VIP is calling in, I might grade them on 20 criteria because the VIP customers are 90% of our business model. But if anybody other than a VIP calls in, I might only grade them on 5 criteria. While I want them to treat those customers well, it's not really as important that they treat them with kid gloves as it is that they treat those VIPs very, very special because that's the majority of our business model. So you can see there's a lot of flexibility here with these lists and call filters, really making the scorecard apply to the correct individuals under the correct circumstances. I'm going to go ahead and kick back that sales team as you've seen here. We'll make this nice and generic. The sales evaluation applies to the sales team's extensions on every single one of their sales calls, every call to or from those extensions. Now, one mentionable. That just means that the scorecard will lend itself to those particular recordings. There's not a requirement that I have to grade every single one of them or even some sort of percentage. If I have time to grade every single one of them this week, fantastic. If I could grade 2% of them, that's okay too. If I don't have time to grade any of them, that's perfectly fine as well. We just lend those scorecards to those recordings. You can grade as many of them as you would like. So that top area is all of the logistics. Now we've told the scorecard when it's going to be visible. Where this really gets interesting is in the lower field below, where we start customizing specifically what it is that you want to ask of those employees. Now, there are 2 different ways that you can go about the creation of the scorecard itself, new to version 7 and beyond. First and foremost, you can just add a series of questions. So we could just go question by question where we're asking very specific things without any compartmentalization. We could also set these up by category. So if you have 4 or 5 questions you want to ask about your introduction, a few questions you want to ask about the body, and a few questions you want to ask about the conclusion, we can break them up into different categories for those different sectors of the recording. Depending on how you want to go about this, we'll change the look and feel just a little bit of creating these evaluation questions. If you were to go about it just by adding another question, which is what we'll do here for this quick little example's sake, I can click Add Another Question, and now I can type in a value for this question. Maybe question number 1 will be nice. Was the employee nice on the call? And we'll just make this one a simple yes/no question or a pass/fail. Yes, they were nice. No, they were not nice. We get the boxes below now where we can ask wording for those particular audiences that are going to use the scorecard. So we get a box for self-grading purposes. We also get a box for supervisor grading purposes. The reason why we have these 2 different text boxes to make it applicable for the grader type. So, because I've chosen to make this for both self and supervisor graders, I'm going to fill out both boxes. If I'd only made it for one audience or the other, I'd only need to fill in that respective box. But I've chosen to make it for both, so for example purposes, for the self-evaluation, I would say something like, was I nice on call? And for the supervisor evaluation, we would say, was the employee nice on call? So you can see we're really gearing it towards that specific audience that's going to log in to grade this scorecard. When an employee logs in to grade his or herself, they get the reflective wording, was I nice on the call? When the supervisor or manager logs in, they get the third person wording, was the employee nice on the call? Just puts them into the right context, makes it a little bit more natural for them to go about grading that scorecard. Last but not least, for every given question, we can set a weight, or how important this question is in the grand scheme of things. For this little scorecard, let's say niceness is important, but it's not the most important thing. We'll say that one's worth 40% of the grade. So if we choose to trump the weight, we're going to make it a function of 100. If, however, we chose to leave it at 1, each of those questions would just be equally weighted. So if this was a 2-question scorecard, they would each be worth 50% of the grade. If it was a 10-question scorecard, they'd each be worth 10% of the grade. Leaving the weight at 1 just makes each question of equal value. But as I said, niceness is kind of a fluffy, silly question, so we'll make this one 40% of the grade. Whereas question number 2, which we can add just by going down to the lower left-hand corner and clicking Add Another Question, you notice it pops up another question box, looks identical to the first question, but now it's labeled as question 2. This is going to be our big sale question. Or, did I make sale? Well, that's the big make or break question. Down here for supervisor wording, it would be, did the employee make sale. That's what we really expect of our sales employee. That one's going to be worth 60% of our grade. And this one, let's choose to make it a good to bad scale. Did I make the sale? Well, maybe you did good, maybe you did bad, maybe you just did okay because they might potentially come back and buy in the future. So here we can set up that question to be valued more importantly than the nice question. So looking back on it here, you can see my weights equal 100, which is very important. If your weights don't equal 100, the system's not going to know how to compute the data, so it won't know how to give you any sort of weighted average. Making them equal 100, now I know when I submit those questions, the system's going to be able to compute, give me an overall weighted average. Happy with my 2-question scorecard here, I can go ahead and hit save. That scorecard's submitted. I can start use that for grading purposes. Keeping in mind, I could have this be as many questions as I wanted it to be. If I wanted it to be 500 questions, I could make it 500 questions. If I wanted it to be 12 questions, it could be 12. However many questions and whatever you would like to ask of those questions that you would like. If I go ahead and hit save, that scorecard is now submitted. I do, though, want to show you that other dynamic where we can now categorize these questions into different sections. So if you were to set up a scorecard that you wanted to be more broken, here's how this would work. You can, when it comes time to start setting up the questions, add in a category. This category might be called opening. And the opening section of the scorecard is going to be worth 25% of the grade. Now within that section, there are a series of questions. I can click add another question, and here I'll get an area where I can type in a weight. This question of the 25% might be worth 50% of that 25%. The next question might be worth 25% of that 25% of the total score. And then the last question here might be worth the remaining 25%. So now within the opening section, we've accounted for 100% of the 25% total. Scrolling back down to the bottom, I can go ahead and add another category. This category we might call the body. The body is going to be worth 50% of the total scorecard weight. Within the body, I might have 25 questions, each of which would be worth 4% of that 50% grade. And then last but not least, you might have another category that would be called your ending. And the ending is worth the final 25% that's not accounted for of the entire weight of the evaluation. And within this, you could add as many questions as you would have necessary. So the point being, we can go ahead and break those into different categories or sections of interest, give those total categories a percentage total of the grade, and then add as many questions inside of that category that you would need to come up with that total percentage. Once you submit the scorecard, the system will do all of the different calculation necessary in order to give you an overall weighted average of that particular scorecard. Another nice advantage to using these categorization sections. Each category at the end user interface will have its own section for notes. So you'll have an option where you can add notes for the opening, notes for the body, notes for the ending. Then there will also be an additional notes field at the end, which are more summative. Here's your notes section for the entire scorecard. So setting up these different categories not only gives you ways to break up those questions, but also gives you additional note fields for each one of those categories. So that's an enhancement that we have in version 7 and beyond of the Tracer software. If you'd like to break those up into logical components within your evaluation, you can do so via this categorization. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel on this scorecard, but hopefully you see the nature of how we create those evaluations for your employees. There's now lots of flexibility in these evaluations. We can set up the scales so that you can grade the questions as you would need, and within creating the evaluations, we can either do it compartmentally or we can just do it as a series of questions for that particular group of people. That's how we create an evaluation. We've got one of those now set up, a sales evaluation that we can use to grade all of our sales team's calls. One last thing that I just want to mention quickly about using these scorecards. In order for your employees to have access to the evaluation, you want to make sure that you've set them up with the appropriate permissions. This is something we talk about at greater length in our user creation course, but I want to mention it now quickly because once you create a scorecard, you'll likely want your employees to start utilizing it. So when you come to the Users and Permissions area, you find a user of interest. Let's in this case pick on Bob Smith here, expand out his profile, go to Application Permissions, and click on Agent and Employee Evaluation. Once you click on that permission key, you can come to the Evaluation tab and not only choose which scorecards this person's going to have applicable, but how they're going to use the evaluation. So if this were a Joe and Jill taxpayer type that you're going to set up for reflective purposes, you might want to just give them permissions for that self-evaluation. If this were more of a manager or supervisor type, you would go ahead and give them more permissions to not only use this in a reflective way if they wanted to, but more importantly, use this in a way where they can now grade those people that he or she would supervise. So make sure that they have access to the appropriate scorecards. Make sure that they're using those scorecards appropriately. Once you hit save, that person will now have access to use the evaluation. They can go into the historical side or the live side if they're a call manager and start grading some of those calls. That then's really all there is to creating those evaluations. Set up lists and call filters, create the evaluation scales, and then go about the customization and programming of the evaluation itself. Once that's completed, just make sure that your users can use those appropriately so that way they can start the grading process. With that evaluation section of our course now complete, the next major thing I want us to talk about is the creation of those ad campaigns. And setting up ad campaigns is actually something that we do inside of this Lists and Other Resources area. So I've navigated us back to Lists and Other Resources, clicked on the first of these list types to give myself a little bit of white space on the side of my screen. The reason for that, as we go about setting up these ad campaigns, I want to set this discussion into a little bit of a context so you have some idea of how these ad campaigns are going to work for your organization. As I mentioned in the introduction, ad campaigns are traditionally used for marketing purposes. You can track the success of your various marketing efforts, whether that's the newspaper, magazine, side of the bus, billboard on 5th Street. Doesn't matter to us, any sort of marketing effort that you might have invested in. These can also, though, be used for companies who are not so dollars and cents oriented, who don't do a lot of marketing, in that we can fool the system to think of the phone numbers your customers dial as ad campaigns to give you a lot of powerful reporting capability. With that being said, let me tell you how these work. Ad campaigns are based off of what we call DNIS or DID numbers. Now, acronyms aside, these are the phone numbers that people dial to reach your organization. This is Digital Number Identification System and Direct Inward Dial. But for our organization, we have a phone number, 480-496-9040. That's our main number. You can dial us there at any time. But let's imagine we have a secondary number, of which we actually have several, but for this example, 480-496-9041. Well, what having that secondary phone number would allow us to do is dedicate it to a specific marketing effort, so that the only time anybody would dial this 9041 number is if they saw it on the side of the bus, in the magazine, the billboard on 5th Street, the flyer I stuck under their windshield wiper. That's a dedicated phone number to a specific campaign. So all we need to do is program in the system to be looking for that phone number and to attribute it to the appropriate campaign. So our system will simply count the number of times that phone number was dialed. Eric, that 9041 phone number was dialed 5 times last night. There must have been 5 people up at 3 o'clock in the morning watching the infomercial that felt compelled enough to call about the product or service. That now gives me some feedback on that campaign. So that's the premise of ad campaign tracking. It's based on specific phone numbers that your customers will dial to reach your organization. As I've mentioned a couple times, even if you don't have phone numbers attributed to marketing efforts, we can still program in your system these phone numbers that your customers would dial to get some nice general information about your public. We can see who's dialing your organization so you know some things that you might not otherwise have been privy to. So let me clear off these John Madden scribbles here and we can go about the programming process. Because setting up an ad campaign is a very quick and easy thing to program. It's simply a 2-step process, all of it done inside of this lists area. First, we need to program those DNIS or DID numbers that your customers are dialing to get a hold of your organization. And then secondly, we'll move up 3 folders and attribute those DNIS numbers to specific ad campaigns. So simple 2-step combo, we can have those numbers now trackable for reporting purposes. First things first, we're going to come to this DNIS DID area. We're going to expand out this list type, and we're going to click on the subgroup underneath here that's called All DNIS. This is a table of all the phone numbers that are dialed to reach your organization. Now, as you notice out of the box, the right-hand window is simply blank. We don't have a clue what the phone numbers are that are dialed to reach your organization, so you have to come in here and populate those. To do so, it's very quick and easy. You go to the right-hand side, click the little plus icon, and it'll pop up a little box asking you for your DNIS information. 3 fields we need to fill out for this one. The DNIS digits are traditionally the last 4 digits of the phone number dialed to reach your organization. So in our little example before, 9041, those are the last 4 digits of the phone number. In reality, we don't track the area code or the office code. We're looking for those last 4 digits to come across the line, so that's what we're going to be actively seeking out. But we do need to plug in the full DNIS number, so 480-496-9041, and you can see that those DNIS digits are in fact just the last 4 digits of the full phone number that's dialed to reach the company. Last but not least, then you give it a bit of a description. This can be anything. Let's call this one our TV ad. We had some money in the budget for a TV commercial this month. That's what this phone number was attributed to. Put in as specific information here as you can. If there was an issue number or a volume number, plug it in there so you know what phone number you're talking about when it comes time to set up the ad campaign. If you are not interested in dollars and cents, here's where you might want to just call this description main line, secondary number, calls to the training room, or directly to Ted's office. Whatever sort of logical description makes sense so you'll know what phone number you're looking at when it comes time for reporting purposes. But let's say, traditionally, we're going to use this for advertising purposes, and this one was for a TV ad. Go ahead and hit save. That phone number is now entered into the system. We will now be on the lookout for that phone number to be dialed by your various customers. Now, I'm only going to program in one of these DNIS numbers just for example purposes, but at this point, I would go about programming all the different DNIS numbers that you want to track for your organization. Unlike a lot of the other stuff we program on the admin side, setting up ad campaigns is a rigid process. You always have to program the DNIS number first, and then you can attribute it to an ad campaign. So by programming all the DNIS numbers right now, you'll save yourself a lot of skipping back and forth. Some customers have 300, 400, 500 different phone numbers they're tracking for various campaigns. It's going to save you a whole heck of a lot of skipping if you just program the phone numbers first and then go about the second step of setting up those ad campaigns. Just a personal recommendation. Having then programmed in the phone numbers, the last phase of setting up an ad campaign is coming here to this ad campaign lists area. And very similar to what we did for DNIS DID lists, we're going to expand out ad campaign lists and click on all ad campaigns in the brackets below. Here's where we're going to index all those different efforts that we're tracking. Just like with DID DNIS, we don't know what your ad campaigns are, so you come over to the right-hand side, click the plus icon, and we can add in a new campaign. Now, as you can see, there's only a few fields that we need to fill out to finish up this programming process. The first thing that you're going to do is find the DNIS number that you want to track for this campaign. In this case, it's a drop-down, no-brainer decision. It's the only one that we've programmed. There's that 9041 number that we just stuck in the DNIS DID table the step previous. So that's the one I'm going to choose. That's the phone number that this ad campaign is attributed to. Next, we'll give it a bit of a description. We'll call this our TV ad. If we have some specifics, we can plug them in here. Maybe this is the one that ran on Fox or the one that ran on ABC. Whatever it is you want to plug in there that's going to help you know what you're looking at. As I mentioned earlier, if there's an issue number, a volume number, a release date, put that information on there. Get as specific as you can so you know what you're looking at specifically when it comes time to compare those different campaigns. The rest of the information is just here for tracking purposes. This will give you some feedback when it comes time to run those reports. First off, you can choose the start date and time. Let's say this campaign ran through the entire month of June 2011. Okay, it started on the 1st. It ran through the 30th, 12 a.m. to midnight that night. Gives me the entire month, so those time ranges will work just fine. and the cost of this campaign was maybe $25,000. I don't have any idea what a TV commercial costs these days. Either got a great deal or got the fleece pulled over our eyes here. That's all of the tracking statistics that we're going to need. If I go ahead and hit save, that campaign is now set up in the software. That's all I need to do for programming. Anytime our system sees that 9041 phone number dialed, it's going to know it was because of the TV ad that ran through the entire month of June and cost us $25,000. At this point, it's very hands-off. You let the system start tracking those statistics, start pulling in that data. You run reports to see how beneficial that campaign has been. Now, if you are interested in simply tracking your phone numbers and you're not that dollars and cents oriented sort of customer, here's how you can fool the system. When you're setting it up as an ad campaign, just trick it. Give it a start date of whenever we started recording your calls and give it a stop date of the year 3000. Give it a cost maybe of $0. So now the system will start tracking all the calls that coming in are the DNIS numbers, but there won't really be any dollars and cents correlation to it, and it won't ever stop attributing it to that main line. So you'll be able to run reports on who's calling your company for all time. The reason we give start-stop dates on ad campaigns is a lot of times there's recycled phone numbers. So if I'm only going to run this campaign in the newspaper for a month, but then I'm going to reuse that phone number 2 weeks later and put it on a billboard, this gives us some more accurate tracking statistics for what was actually attributed to that specific runtime. With that in mind, if you are going to recycle phone numbers, another personal recommendation is to give those at least a 2 or 3 week stopgap. That way you'll get much more accurate information when it comes time to run your reports. If you don't give those phone numbers enough time to cycle down, you might get some unwanted statistics. You get a whole bunch of people that called in from the billboard ad, but really it was just people finally responding to those flyers you stuck under the windshield wipers that took them a while to give you a call in. So the more stopgap you give between recycling the phone number, the more accurate your statistics will be for those various campaigns. Again, just another personal recommendation. But as I said, that's really all there is to programming. The system's going to do all the rest of the data collection. All you need to do is start running some reports to see how successful those campaigns have been. So to finish out our Tracer Advanced Admin course, I want to show you a couple types of reports that these ad campaigns can generate, just to give you some tip of the iceberg idea of what these are going to look and feel like. So I have 2 flavors of ad campaign reports for you. The first one here is a nice area code breakdown. This one specifically is for a campaign that we ran in the local newspaper, and we can see the area codes that responded. So, we were not surprised to see that Arizona came in at number 1 and number 2 as respondents. Our surprise, though, was that Illinois came in twice in the top 10. So there must have been a pretty big demand for our product or service in Illinois if they're calling in from a local newspaper ad that we ran in Arizona. It tells me next month I might want to target Illinois. Specifically, I'm going to hit the Windy City, western suburbs of Chicago, downtown only in the loop. I'm not going to smatter Illinois with campaign dollars. I'm going to go for Chicago, see what sort of bang for my buck I can get. This, though, is probably one of the best ones for people who are just looking for generic information. Because if you start tracking your main phone number, you can learn things about your public. Who's calling into your organization? I see this used all the time for taxi dispatch, 911, police services. I can know where to station people. I might put 10 squad cars in the 480 area code. I might only put 1 squad car in the 818 because there's just not as much crime there. That's not where people need rides off our taxis. That's not where I need to keep buses for traffic. I can put as many people in those different area codes as would be necessary for your business model. Or if you're looking to expand, branch out, set up a satellite office. In our case, it might be a really good idea to put a satellite office in Illinois because it looks like we're getting a lot of traffic there. So this will give you some nice generic information about who's calling in, some statistics about your public. For those who are dollars and cents oriented, I like to give this view as well. This is a comparative report that'll show you all the different campaigns that you've been running. Now, as you can see, quite a few of these had yet to pull in any statistics, but I do like to show things like cost per call. That newspaper ad cost me 21 cents a call to bring in. The infomercial cost us almost $4 a call to bring in. So while the buzz around the office might be that infomercial, in reality, I got a heck of a lot more bang for my buck by way of the newspaper ad than I did via the infomercial. And I can run that ad maybe 2 times and still manage to save my company 32 grand. This system will pay for itself very quickly by savings like this. Great little ROI feature. And another thing I like to point out on this one, we have a differentiation between new calls and total calls. New calls are the unique caller ID numbers that called in off the campaign, whereas total calls are just the total number of times that phone number was dialed. That's a very telling statistic, because on average, the typical person had to dial back in 3 times before they got all their questions answered. So now I can know how many unique people I got a hold of as opposed to just how many total calls came in. Very important to places like pizza places. Well, if I put flyers on people's windshield wipers, they put that flyer up on their refrigerator, they might call that phone number every time they want to order a pie. Well, that's going to throw off my total call statistic. So I can see that there was 477 unique people that were reached, 1,334 total calls. On average, they dialed back 3 times. In reality, there's probably just somebody out there that really likes pizza. They might have dialed in 50 times since they got the flyer. So I get a more telling statistic from those new calls than I might get from the total call statistic. So ad campaigns, great little tool, very easy setup, can give you a lot of nice information about your ad campaigns and your generic public that's calling into your organization. With that then, we'll bring our Advanced Tracer Administrator class to a close. If you have any questions about the topics that were covered in this course, please feel free to visit our website at www.oasis.com or call into our headquarters at 888-496-9040 and speak to a member of the training, sales, or tech support staff. Thank you very much then for participating in the course. We wish you the best of luck with your system and hope you have a great day.